Good morning. Welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad you could be with me this morning. We are experiencing a lot of COVID in our community right now, and I know that there may be some people watching from home that normally do come to Sunday School most recently, but if we can all be safe and careful, then maybe this surge can go ahead and pass through our community and we can be back to normal soon. We're praying for all of those people who have been affected by the virus. Some people have lost loved ones, and it is a very difficult time for everyone. So we're continuing our study in Ecclesiastes today, and this today's lesson comes from chapter 7 in Ecclesiastes. As Solomon has been studying everything in the world and all the different aspects of human behavior and human activity, today the lesson that we have, he seems to be making some contrasts between things, and in a way this lesson kind of reminds me of the book of Proverbs at times in some of the things that he said. And particularly if you look at the beginning of chapter 7, which is not covered in our lesson, we start at verse 11, but at the beginning of chapter 7 there's several things that he contrasts back and forth. It's better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools, and things like that. And there's a couple of them that I'll read. I forgot to silence my phone. Hang on. Sorry about that. Those phones will be they're very useful tools, aren't they? When they work and they help us, and other times they just can be an aggravation. So there are a couple of verses then in chapter 7 before the lesson that I wanted to read. Verse 9, it says, "Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools." That one, among others, really reminded me of the book of Proverbs. Because, the way that it's written, but then the lesson of it is very important for us. Don't be eager to be angry. Eager, you see some people who become angry very quickly. They have a short fuse, we might say. And so Solomon is reminding us that that's not a good way to be. That, you can cause yourself problem. And he says, "For anger resides in the bosom of fools." I often have thought that anger is the result of unmet expectations, and sometimes anger towards God, because God is not doing something that we think he should, or has not done something that we thought he should have done. And then anger towards parents or whatever, children, and it's often because we had an expectation of something and then it did not happen the way that we thought, and it makes us angry. I have a temper just like everybody else. And then let's look on it then at verse 10. It says, "Do not say, 'Why is it that the former days were better than these?' For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this." I thought that was an interesting statement. He says, don't sit around saying, "Oh, the good old days were a whole lot better than now." He says it's not from wisdom that you say something like that. And honestly, we've said that a lot lately, haven't we? And so, that little verse right there could be the whole lesson today, as we would examine why Solomon said it's not wise to say that, or it's not from wisdom that you would say that. Perhaps, because there were problems back in the good old days too, but you don't tend to remember the problems. You just have the fond memories a lot of times. And maybe that's the reason that he said it. But there could be other things we could talk about on that. But let's go ahead then and start on the lesson. I'm going to read the first two verses of our lesson, verses 11 and 12. Wisdom along with an inheritance is good, and an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its possessors. So he is equating kind of wisdom with an inheritance. Wisdom along with an inheritance, he says, is a good thing. And then he goes on to say wisdom is protection. And I thought about the strong families as you try to be good parents and good leaders for your children, and you try to pass down that wisdom and knowledge to your children to try to help them to avoid some of the problems in life, and how that wisdom that you pass down is an inheritance to them. It is just as much a part of their inheritance as if you were to give them money, because it is a valuable thing. A child that is raised without wise input into their life is going to do just whatever they feel like is right, and often that's not going to be the right thing. And we see that sometimes. And so I never really thought about the idea of your wisdom or your advice for your children and grandchildren being an inheritance for them, something that is of value. And so I thought that was kind of a nice verse. We should inherit wisdom from our parents. I say should because we sometimes people choose to ignore the wisdom that the elders give. And when they ignore the wisdom, then they're setting themselves up for a problem, aren't they? Because what is the saying that history repeats itself? And if you don't learn from the wisdom of others, then you're likely to repeat the same mistakes that they might have already made, and that's why they have the wisdom to tell you that that's not a good way to do or to be or whatever. Okay, let's look at verse 13. This is one of those rhetorical questions that Solomon says, consider the work of God, for who is able to straighten what he has bent? So now he's talking about, and I think parts of this chapter, it's kind of like, here's a thought, here's a thought, here's a thought. And they do kind of all go together or along the same theme, but that this is a different thought then. Consider the work of God, who is able to straighten what he has bent. And the answer is nobody. We can't, if God wants something to be a certain way, we can't force it to be differently. And Solomon also could not. And then verse 14, in the day of prosperity, now this is related, I think, to 13 that we just read about God, what God does, we can't change it. In the day of prosperity, be happy, but in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other, so that man would not discover anything that will be after him. So, what he's saying is, when you have a good day, a prosperous day, then be happy about it. But when you have a bad day, accept it. And, maybe you won't be happy about it, but you must consider that God made the good day, and He's also made the day that had something bad in it. And God, I guess this goes back to the discussion about the fact that God has a much bigger picture in mind than we do. And He works all things together, where we only look at our current and present situation for ourselves and how it affects us or relates to us or our family. And that's about as far as we look a lot of times. But God is seeing things in a different perspective, and we need to accept and not get bent out of shape when a bad day comes along, because God has also made that day, and it's a day that we still honor and trust God to take care of us and see us through it. And then we'll go on to verses 15 to 18. And this is where our lesson, there is another little section. Okay, 15 to 18. I have seen everything during my lifetime of futility. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. Do not be excessively righteous, and do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Do not be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp one thing and also not let go of the other. For the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. So here you can really see how Solomon is contrasting things one against the other. And he says, in his life of observation, he has seen a righteous man who dies young, and he's seen a wicked man who seemed to have a prolonged life and still remained wicked, and I guess what he's really saying is it doesn't really make sense on human terms. And then he goes on with this admonition, not to be excessively righteous or overly wise. It reminded me of a time that we met a young lady, and she was like excessively in your face, talking about the Bible or talking about Jesus. And it was her enthusiasm. She was not trying to be obnoxious, but in a way she was being obnoxious with it, because she was very aggressive with it. She met us and we were strangers, and yet she started to aggressively try to instruct us about the Bible. And she was younger than us, and in the course of the conversation she made this comment that I have never forgotten. She said that her sister told her that she was oversaved. I had never heard that phrase before. She was oversaved. And I think she had been doing the same thing to the sister that she was doing to us. And it was almost like being excessively righteous, like Solomon warns against, because you can be so pious, so looking at yourself as being almost perfect, and then the next step is obviously to look down on others. I mean, it's much of a temptation, I guess, to do that, and we do see that sometimes, with people, and I won't bring up any more examples. And then after that, he says, don't be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? Now, I thought this was a very timely statement. If a person is excessively wicked, doing excessively wicked things, he's liable to die before his time. And if a person is exceedingly foolish, or he just says, do not be a fool. So if a person, let's say, is very foolish, they make foolish decisions, even though they're not necessarily wicked decisions, but very foolish decisions, you can also get yourself killed, can't you? Or you can die before your time. I had a discussion with someone the other day, about how God has an expiration date on us. He knows when that is going to come to pass, like the Bible says. But at the same time, can we do something that causes us to die before it was God's time for us? And I don't know the answer to that. God knows everything. And I suppose he knows. Maybe he has a time that he has planned for us. That would be the time that we would die. But then we could do something that would shorten the time or cause us to die before our time, as Solomon puts it. So that's something to think about in these days and every day as we make decisions about health and safety, but also, many other things that are going on in our society these days. The other thing that I thought about as I was reading this little section was that we have a stewardship over our lives. I guess that, I've never thought of it in that way with that word, but it just kind of came to me that way, that we have a stewardship over our lives. God has entrusted us this time on earth to live this life, and he has given it to us for a purpose and a reason. He has things that he wishes for us to do, and we have stewardship over our lives. And that involves a lot of things. It could involve taking good care of ourselves so that we are able to do all the things that God intends for us to do. And I'm pointing the finger at me on that because I'm, I could very well say, okay, drop 50 pounds and you would be a healthier person. And I hope one day I can do that. But, to think about it along those terms of stewardship, that God has entrusted this life to us, and we should not just willy-nilly throw it away under any circumstances, by overeating, by alcoholism, or whatever it might be. It's a trust that he has given us. If you think about it that way, it puts a little different spin on it. And then the last bit that our lesson covers is verses 19 to 22. Let me read those. Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. Also, do not take seriously all words which are spoken, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others. So he makes a statement about wisdom strengthening a wise man, making him strong more than 10 rulers in a city. So very strong. But then in contrast, he also says, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. And I think that is a true statement from Solomon. There's another place in the Bible where it says, there's none righteous, no, not one. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we try to obey God, we never are going to get everything right. We're not going to be perfect. And anyone who thinks they're perfect there you go. that's the beginning of their admission of guilt, because the Bible clearly says there's none perfect, no, not one. And so we do our best, and we try to use the wisdom that God has given us, but we also have to remind ourselves, and we have to balance it out. As we're talking about balance, we have to balance it out and know that no matter how hard we try, don't let it go to your head. And then this last bit that he had mentioned, where he says, don't take seriously all the words that are spoken, so you will not hear your servant cursing you. I did not remember ever having read that before, but I thought that was a interesting statement. And it's true. There are things that people say, and the best way to deal with it is just to let it pass. Just ignore it. Don't dwell on it. Don't pick at it. Don't feel that everything that person says has to be perfect toward you. Just let it slide and keep going. And that is a good attitude to have in life, because if we pick at everything that everybody says, then pretty soon we'll have an argument with someone, won't we? And it says, because if you don't sort of ignore some things that are spoken, you may hear your servant cursing you. And that was just an example, I guess, of the fact that people are going to say some things sometimes. They might even let it slip. They really maybe didn't mean it, or maybe they did. But you can't let that ruin your day. You just have to let it slide and just keep on going. And then it says, you have likewise many times cursed others. I don't know that I've cursed others before, but I know there have been times where I complained about others that I probably should not have been complaining about that person, and so in that way, truly, we do curse others, we talk bad about others, and, if they ever accidentally hear us say it or know that we've said it, then it can cause a big problem. And so, if we would all, I guess, give each other a little more grace and encourage each other, I like to say, to help that person be the best version of themselves that they can be, then we'll all get along a lot better, and just let everything else just kind of slide on by. And that's a good way to handle life and keep your wits about you. So that's the end of our lesson for today. You might want to go on and read to the end of the chapter, and then we're going to skip over chapter 8 and go to chapter 9. So next week we'll be in chapter 9. So if you want to read chapter 8, read through it, because there's good stuff in every chapter of Ecclesiastes. And I hate to skip anything, but in the interest of time we have to. And so just go ahead and read forward, and then I'll see you next time. Thank you for being